Welcome to Abstract Photography Week. So, this is a week where you're going to be challenged to look at the world in a different way. And I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of what I mean by that. So, this week, like I said, you're going to have to look at the world in a different way. So, think about rotating your photos in an unconventional way, thinking about maybe getting close to everyday objects, like here is an apartment complex. This one right here is a close-up view of a cheese grater. So look at things around your house, take them outside. I would definitely look into your cell phones and their macro capabilities. I know a lot of the newer phones, they do have macro, and if you're using ProCam 7 or FV5 Lite, they also have that option as well to do macro photography. If you're shooting with a DSLR, because you will be getting close to certain objects, I would strongly recommend shooting manually and using the fine tuner focus to really get close and focus on your everyday objects. Here's another example of abstract photography. You are really paying attention to the way that you look at a photo and the lines and the shapes and the colors and the textures. So here's a really great example of something that we don't quite know, but we kind of recognize. We're mainly looking at the shapes and the patterns that it creates. Here's another example of abstract photography. A lot of people, if you're a beginner, will look at architecture as a source for your abstract photos. You will have to take one black and white abstract photo and one color abstract photo as well. Here's an example of how you can just use an everyday object such as hair with, I think, wax or pomade or something, and it creates this wave-like effect. Here's another everyday object. When we look at these objects, the best type of abstract photography are ones that maybe take us a second to figure out what it is. So, for example, this one here is probably, if I had to guess, like cardboard that's rolled up, but the way that it's photographed and the way that it's shot makes it visually interesting to look at. Here's another really good example of black and white abstract photography. They just took some sort of object here and they wove it in and out, and it has great lighting. Again, make sure you shoot your photos outside to get your optimal lighting for your pictures. Here's another example of architectural sites as abstract photography. It has really great lines and shapes. Here's a good example of a color photography. So I would look around your house on your way to and from school, because abstract photography is everywhere and it shouldn't take you too long to find something. You can really look at anything in life and make it abstract. So here's a really great example of a color abstract photo. It wasn't just these glass blocks on the photo. What they did is they give us a little place to rest our eyes right here in this like white colored grate. The, like I said, the best objects for abstract photography week are ones that kind of make us guess and make us take a second to look at to figure out what it is. So these are one of those Chinese finger traps. And what's interesting about this photo is the way it's shot and the perspective. The photographer really gets down in there and even looks through the photo to create kind of a like a tunnel-like effect. Here's another abstract photo using train tracks as inspiration. And once again, I do want to remind you that any photo that you see can be a source of inspiration. So if you want to do something similar to this, you can. Here is an old aperture of a camera. It's just shot up really close. This is an example of symmetrical photography. So when you learned about the rule of thirds in the masterclass video notes, it tells you like the most interesting photos are the ones that are off-centered. but there are always exceptions to any rule, and this is one of them. Here is a spider web, and what's interesting about this one, it is not shot straight on. That wouldn't be abstract. They took a really interesting angle, and they had a very specific depth of field to their photo. Barn door. Now, you can create your own abstract photos. So the picture in the top left, they just took papers and folded them in a really interesting way to create an abstract photo. This abstract photo here focuses on the spoke of a bicycle. And then think about your perspectives. A lot of abstract photography really looks at the world in a different way. So here's an example of somebody looking at the world in a different way. They're kind of laying on the ground looking up with their camera, and it creates this weird, funky effect, especially if you have a fisheye lens or different kinds of apps that kind of distort your vision. I would probably look into those this week. Here's a very good example of using just things around your house and creating abstract photos. So in this photo, they just use oil and a little bit of water and bubbles, and they mixed it all up to create this really cool effect. I would highly suggest that you take this kind of photo outside and either on a cloudy day or in the shade. And then if you're using a cell phone, try macro mode. It might take you a couple tries, but it is going to be slightly easier using a DSLR and manual mode to get this effect. Here's another example of abstract photography. I will tell you that this week, and this week only, leaves are off limits. I want you to challenge yourself and to do something different than this, but it is an example of abstract photography. I'm just going to tell you the one rule this week is that leaves are off limits. Here's an example of abstract photography in nature. This is just an old tree that's a little bit shredded. And then if you have a job, I would look at your workplace to find some inspiration to take your photos. When you're looking at abstract photography, we're really looking at line, texture, shape, color, and this is a good example of texture. Here's another great example of texture using one of those old air filters. And this time of year, your parents or grandparents are probably replacing them. And it would be a great opportunity to just rip it up and crumple it and take an abstract photo. When you're taking your abstract photos, make sure that you are paying attention to things like dust and hairs and things up close that you normally wouldn't see in real life. You might need to wipe down your objects before you shoot them, or you'll end up having to edit them in Photoshop. Here's another example of an abstract photo. And then to shoot this kind of photo here, like I said, there's exceptions to every rule. And as a beginner photographer, you want to shoot, out in the daytime, on a cloudy day, or in the shade. But this goes against those rules. So this one is shot at night, and you're just kind of in the car, you're looking at the lights. And if you are shooting with your cell phone, you want to tap and focus on the water so that the lights appear blurry. And this is a really good example of abstract photos in a very unconventional, different way. If you're interested in borrowing any of the RGB lights, this would be a great example of making an abstract photo with an everyday simple object such as a glass bottle. Here's some more examples of abstract photography. Again, if you're a beginner, I would emphasize looking at architecture as a source for inspiration. So here's some more examples of abstract photography. Most of these are architectural. And then here's another example of something that you can create at home. So if you just take a simple glass or big plastic see-through object and fill your object with water and a little bit of soap and mix it up, you can create really cool abstract photos. When you are creating your abstract photos, make sure your pictures are intentionally in focus where it needs to be. If you want certain things blurry, you might have to adjust your fine tuner or go to the manual setting on your DSLR to adjust your focus. So make sure your pictures are in focus this week. Here's another example. This focus here is blurry foreground, clear background. As for this one is pretty much all in focus. And this is just kind of stairwell. Here's another example of abstract photography in nature. And then this one here is something that anybody can do during sunset. You're focusing on the screen door. A lot of you have screen doors in your houses or in your windows, and it is not dark outside yet. It's more of like a sunrise or a sunset. And when you focus on your little grid, your lights become kind of blurry and abstracted. Here's another example. Some more examples. Here's a really funny example of something that might be in your fridge. This is broccoli shot up super close. This is a macro shot. It's an abstract shot. So here's an example of what I don't want you to do. So this kind of example here is kind of all over the place. I don't know where to focus as a viewer. The picture's like really grainy and dark. I don't know as a viewer where to go to. So I do want you to avoid something like this. This picture here is almost abstract. So if the photographer would just either get closer or crop towards the center or kind of go in one direction over here where my mouse is going, it would be a lot more abstract. Right now, I can immediately tell that it's the back of a truck. So the point of abstract photography is to make us guess at what it is and have us focus on the picture rather than what it is. Here's another example of something that doesn't quite have direction just yet, and we need to have our eye kind of breathe and rest on. So we have a super complicated abstract object, which you might recognize as like probably a motherboard of a computer. If I would maybe zoom in and just focus on this area here where I have this nice dark object to focus on and rest, that would probably be a stronger abstract photo than taking a picture of the whole thing. Now, what I do want you to avoid when you are doing your abstract photos, obviously leaves. You can't do leaves this week. And I don't want you guys to get confused with abstract photography and patterns. So you can't take pictures of like leopard skin prints of clothing or scrapbook paper. That doesn't have any depth to it. So I show this example of just like a printed piece of paper because this isn't necessarily abstract photography. It's very flat, has no depth. It's kind of all over the place. We don't have direction. So make sure when you're shooting abstract photography that you're looking at actual objects, three-dimensional objects. So if you have questions about Abstract Photography Week, just let me know. If you want me to look at your abstract photos before you turn them in, I'm more than happy to do that. But Pinterest is your best source for finding inspiration when thinking about abstract photography.